This is Next Matters Most. It's a podcast on the future of business, entrepreneurship, and technology. We like to share experiences. We like to talk about our journeys, ups, downs, etc., and share that with the world. And we're here with Jarrod Overson of Vino, or Vino.dev, depending. You can kind of give us some context there. And you're based in Cary, is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so right down the road from us over here in Durham. I guess, before talking about the business, maybe give us your sort of few-minute bio of who's Jarrod and what's he working on and what does he care about?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Jarrod Overson. Been programming and making things since I was 11. I started making video games on my graphing calculator for my friends in math class, and it just was fun. So taught myself how to program. Went to work straight out of there. Worked at Napster, Riot Games. Started a few consulting companies. Went to Shape Security about 7 years ago. We defeated bad guys stealing your bank accounts, your airline miles, stuff like that for 7 years. Got acquired by F5 last year for the magical $1 billion. And 6 months ago, decided to pursue something that I've been wanting for a couple decades now, and finally realized that if I didn't try to do it myself, I would end up regretting it forever. So that's where I am now.
Sweet. I definitely heard a Napster reference in there. So how was that?
It was fun. It was in the legit Napster days. So we're building a legitimate music streaming service, just like Spotify, Apple Music, stuff like that. Now, we're clearly very, very early. Like, to everyone who worked there, it was just such an obvious value. Like you paid like $7-8 a month, and you got all the music that existed on the planet whenever you wanted it. It was awesome, but it was before a time where people really recognized the value of that. So they were like, you mean you rent the music? You don't own it? Why would I do that when I can buy a CD? So now everything is completely flipped. But it was a good experience in having the right idea at the wrong time.
Wow, dude, that's awesome. Yeah, and I see the years you were there, which I think was post dates when I was in college, which I don't think was the legit years. But that was, but I feel like, I guess, yeah. I mean, I think in theory, in spirit, it was legit. Like, we're sharing. People can, I guess, make a tape for somebody, and it was like no big deal. Like, oh, I'll copy my CD. But I guess maybe everyone was pirating, but it was always okay on, like, I share with my friend, small scale, but not on, not the scale of the internet. How much and that's funny to think about that use case. Like, how much did just like devices and other gadgets adopting streaming sort of play? Like, it was sort of like an ecosystem thing, right? That there needed to be more device outlets. Like, this is almost not total pre-iPhone, but like Apple iPhone, like mass takeover. And they weren't obviously putting your stuff on there because they wanted to sell you through iTunes. But yeah, I'm thinking like Sonos of the world type things.
Yeah, I mean, we're partnered with Sonos. I think I'm not sure if you called them Windows phones back in the day, but like those phones that ran some Windows-like operating system would allow you to. So you'd subscribe to Napster, and then you'd be able to load music onto your device with some sort of like DRM that expires within 30 days if you haven't logged in to refresh your licenses, stuff like that. So there were solutions, but it was definitely a cumbersome, not super great experience. Like, you had to really, really want to use it to get the value out of it. And I worked there when the iPhone was launched. And there were two very different viewpoints within Napster as to what that was going to do. There was the viewpoint where, like, this is amazing. This is such a good device. This is going to change everything. This is so much better on BlackBerries, Windows phones, styluses, Palms, whatever. And then there was the wild opposite extreme who thought that Apple was making a bad decision and that would be their downfall. I think history has shown which side had a little bit more understanding as to where things were going to go.
Yeah. Well, and it seems like that, I mean, that didn't really impact Napster because it's not like the iPhone was adopting, the other streaming services right out of the gates. It was more just like the future's not always clear, which is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there wasn't even an app store when iPhone launched, so there wasn't even an opportunity to get on that iPhone.
That's hilarious. What was it like? And not to stay on this too long, but I just was such a notable, well, for some people in some
Yeah,
age brackets, I
yeah.
guess, but like, what was it like having the right idea at the wrong time? I mean, that was like a really great statement. And I'm sure that, I mean, a lot of people have that statement, but that was actually like 1,000% validated to be true, because the exact same idea is now worth $1 billion a few times over with inside a few different organizations. And not and only a few years later too, not like this was all 20 years ago or whatever. This was like 2 years later or something. But yeah,
Yeah.
what was that like? What was that feeling like?
It was it was a little bit frustrating because we would see services like Pandora and even Spotify start to gain popularity with their services when we had a, it was a larger we were uh, when compared, we had just more of everything. We had more support, more compatibility, but we just had that legacy of the name. That just people had a hard time really understanding what Napster was at that point, because it was so associated with illegal dealings in the early 2000s. Even when I said I worked at Napster, and told people that they should use it, they questioned whether or not they would get in trouble. So it was definitely a problem with the name. But it was it was a lesson in sustainability, because if you do have the right idea and you can live long enough, then you can build enough of the platform so that when people come around, that you'll be ready for them. But if you burn out too much trying to change people's perspectives when you really think they're going to change on their own, then you end up just blowing massive amounts of money and effort on something that you really have a hard time changing.
Yep. That's huge. I feel like we could just end the interview there and post that like 1.5 minutes, and that would be like a great lesson. So that's awesome. Okay, well, yeah, I guess let's switch gears back to more present day. And I mean, most of these experiences previously were on the West Coast. So I guess what brought you to the Greater Triangle area as a whole, namely Cary?
Yeah. I grew up in New England, Massachusetts, and Vermont. Beautiful area. Vermont, absolutely gorgeous. Not all that much technology though, and I was definitely a pretty big nerd. And one winter, just got sick of Massachusetts and Vermont. Just I couldn't deal with it anymore. Just packed up, drove cross country to San Diego. After visiting it for just a couple days, like, this is amazing. Why would anyone not live here? Then after a few years there, having some kids, bounced up to the Silicon Valley area because of an offer that just seemed too good to pass up and not explore. And then being there made me realize that I did not want to raise my kids in that area at all. So I needed to figure out where was going to be next. Visited North Carolina to see some friends, and North Carolina was like all the best parts of New England without the disgusting, vicious weather. So I fell in love with it pretty quickly, and moved here about 3 years ago.
Okay, cool. And so, tell me about the sort of origin story of Vino Technologies. You kind of alluded to, you've been wanting to work on something for a while, and you'd be really sad and disappointed if you didn't. So if there's no time, like the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, right? The second best time is today. So there's no time like the present. What was kicking around in your head like prior to starting it, and then kind of the impetus to really get going?
So I've worked at kind of large enterprises frequently. I mean, Napster wasn't that large, but I've consulted with Best Buy. I worked at Riot Games, massive. Shape went from small to big. F5 is pretty big, and I've seen so many times over and over again just how teams can start working really, really quickly and produce a lot of value very, very rapidly. And then gradually, the vast majority of those teams just slow to a crawl. And that's partly due to scale, towards the friction, the documentation. But it was always something that I kept on seeing over and over and over again. And what would normally have taken just like a week or two to develop and deploy and get into production over the course of time could take almost a quarter. And it's something that I've seen happen myself. I've been part of teams that have slowed down. I've heard this story many, many times. And it always seemed like it was a problem that really shouldn't exist anymore. I went back last year, so I tried to start a couple of different like software as a service companies because I had plenty of experience, could whip something up, and I stopped at the same point every time because it was just doing the same stuff over and over and over again. So like authentication. Every service needs users and passwords. Why do I need to build that for the 10,000th time? I've built it a bunch of times at different companies. Every company does it the same way. It's basically like 2 ways you should store credentials. There's 1,000 wrong ways to store credentials. Why isn't it easier to just like plug something in and get everything you need? And there's like, of course, there's services like Okta, cloud services, whatever. You can pay somebody a fraction of a penny per transaction or a few bucks per user or something like that to get it. But it's just something that like it's not difficult to do. It's just work. So the slowing down, the cost of getting started, all that just seemed like it was really, really big opportunity to solve that. So kind of just rewound a bit and looked at the like foundation of application building to try and figure out where the biggest friction is that makes things difficult to reuse and difficult to maintain and sustain and scale. And then we started building up from a composable unit so that we can just basically build applications out of these building blocks that just automatically scale. They're automatically what you could consider microservices or like code containers. Basically, it gives a way for us to plug things in much more easily so that we can reuse things more easily. We can share things, outsource more easily. We can maintain things more easily because everything's kind of a black box. It doesn't matter what's inside it. It just matters what goes in and out. And it became a lot of fun when we started tackling the problem and realizing that it actually could be solved now.
Wow. I guess I kind of want to go in a couple different directions. I guess what's been your experience so far working kind of in the triangle? Has it been like you just work remotely because obviously COVID and everything, or have you been able to like kind of plug into the community? And if so, have you gained any value through that, or good, bad, better, indifferent, whatever?
Yeah, actually, I moved out here. So I've always put together like meetup groups at meetup.com. Mm-hmm. San Diego, the San Jose area. So took over I think it was the Node.js one when I first got out here. Oh, cool. And I was wrong time in my life to maintain that. So that combined with COVID, I ended up having to pass it off early last year, late 2019, whenever all that started to get more complicated. But yeah, there's some great people around here. There's a great web community, like the JavaScript and open source community. The All Things Open conference around here it attracts a lot of smart people. Yeah, it's been awesome out here.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So I guess back to the product. This feels like it's kind of like it feels like it's a promise that's been made many times, right? Yeah. Like, yeah. It's going to be easy to deploy, like no code, low code, no code, all that stuff. And it doesn't always deliver, or it's always got some caveats. I mean, who are the kind of the competition or just speak to that, right? I mean, obviously you're an engineer, so you've seen sort of the evolution of some of these promises, like, oh, I just drag and drop, it's a WYSIWYG, and yep. Then all of a sudden my application spins up and I'm in business. And I've always actually been interested in those because I'm more of a business developer, right? So I'm I like sales. If I could build prototypes to help sort of demo something, that would be effective. If I could easily put up my idea, but it's just never that easy, right? And so yeah. I'm well, and then where does it go from there? So I guess, yeah, what have you seen, and how are you sort of positioning it as different, or is this just technology's evolved and now we're ready for this kind of product?
It's a little bit of both. Kind of back to the timing discussion. People have been trying to do stuff similar to what Vino's doing right now, and tons of people are trying to do it right now. But the people have definitely grown accustomed to some of the concepts that they need to just accept before they can jump into something like this. Things like containerization, abstracting large chunks of logic around a black box that you only operate through via APIs or ports or something like that. like before Linux containers and Docker, you could do similar things with VMs, but they're just way too heavy. Now that Docker has got people wrapping their heads around containerizing processes and now microservices and sidecars and Kubernetes, things like that, it was easier to see how you can keep on breaking things down into these reusable building blocks and connecting them. And then at the core of what we're doing at Vino is abstracting the interface between all of these blocks to an asynchronous bracketed stream as the only way to input and output data, which is it's a way to abstract any input and any output, so you don't have to worry about like patterns, builders, asynchronous versus synchronous, futures, callbacks, whatever. But that concept is difficult to throw at somebody right away if they're not used to something like that. But now it's very, very common to scale out large distributed systems through like message queues, like NATs, RabbitMQ, PubSub, things like that. And that makes it easier for people to stomach that at a smaller level because they've already seen the value at a higher level. And we're doubling down on WebAssembly as a transformational technology. Because that I think is going to be extremely valuable a million different ways, but it's going to require people to change a lot of how they think development should work and what they should target. So that already adds a lot of cost to leveraging WebAssembly, and we are then just a little bit of comparative cost on top of that. Whereas if we were just like a framework for an existing a language or technology, we'd basically be telling people, it's like, hey, you can do literally the exact same thing you're doing right now, just completely differently if you use Vino, which is this ridiculous thing. No one should do that because the cost is too high and the value is unknown. Now, if you want to take advantage of WebAssembly, you're already paying a pretty high cost. So we're confident that the cost on top ends up being insignificant and or attractive because the value we're promising is that much higher.
That's awesome. I mean, it's funny how it kind of fits into the previous story of, right product, wrong time. And now maybe this is kind of right product, right time. And I guess that was kind of a big component of that. So WebAssembly is a transformational technology. I mean, usually we think of things that are like IoT or blockchain or whatever, it's like a bigger word, like the internet, and it's funny because when you're talking, I was like, sometimes we overcomplicate things, but it's almost like the metaphor of, before all these companies invested into like all this expensive servers, we didn't have the cloud, and now it's easier to spin something up because they realize they can rent space there. And it's like, oh my gosh, the cost just went down by at least one, if not two factors of 10 to build a simple application. And so here we are. So maybe tell me about WebAssembly and why that's transformational in your mind.
So WebAssembly, for any listeners or viewers, I'm not sure if you distribute the videos or listen to the podcast as audio. For anyone who's not aware, it's a format, it's a specification for an executable format that basically it sounds like Java bytecode, like a JVM. The difference here is that it's the only other executable format that will run in web browsers aside from JavaScript. So it's a faster, more performant, smaller, quicker to start up executable format that runs on the largest platform that we've ever had in human history, just the web. So there's so much opportunity ahead of WebAssembly that we're very, very excited for it. But it changes the way people have to think about development because targeting the web is not just like recompiling to WebAssembly. You don't just take something that compiles on Linux and throw it on a Windows machine and just run it as a different binary. You have to think about the problem differently. You have to think about streaming as a first-class concept. You have to think about small payloads, small deliverables. You have to think about targeting hundreds, if not thousands, of different devices simultaneously. It's it's a very, very different problem. But WebAssembly opens up the web world to every developer that exists right now, or that developer that writes in a language that can compile to WebAssembly, which the list is massive. So there's a lot of value that will be unlocked with WebAssembly, but right now it's kind of a hostile environment with an inhospitable development experience. So that's why we also feel confident that doubling down on it means that we can extract a lot of value, but it also means that we're going to be rolling at the head of the pack with everyone else, because we're all limited by the same progress being made.
So now that you said that, I want you to kind of answer that again, because I did get a lot of that. What is that value layer? So yeah, it's got value that it adds, but it's got a lot of challenges, which is blocking adoption. But you're going to extract the value layer and make that sort of a core part of how your product will. One of the core reasons your business will add product significantly, or add value to product development significantly. So what is that, like, layman's terms, value for developers of the WebAssembly layer and like the stack, if you will?
Yeah, it's basically it's a universal binary format. So for any code that you write, you can deploy it anywhere and have it run the same way. It's kind of like the promise of Java: write once, run everywhere. But it's much closer to JavaScript, where you will have quirks from system to system, but it is very much the same sort of JavaScript that runs everywhere. And it's kind of like Docker containers for application level code. Like you get the sandbox for logic, you get the security considerations that have come along with the 25 years of JavaScript experience that the developers have had building out JavaScript VNs in browsers. So you get this highly performant, very, very low level, very, very minimal bytecode that comes all wrapped up in a nice secure sandbox that can run anywhere. So it's a very, very exciting way forward for me, because like it gives you the package for building blocks.
Yep. And I guess I want to kind of go forward and back, but to go forward, who are your customers? Is it it sounds like this is something that can be, is it just like R&D and innovation teams, or is it like this is for teams building at scale in an enterprise? Is it are they developers because you want them to kind of pull through to the organization, just like a GitHub, or how a lot of those end up spreading? But who's kind of your main customer or customers?
So right now we have to target this thing as many different layers, because I mean we are early, like with the Napster example. There are a lot of people who aren't really ready to bother with things like WebAssembly, especially when they're perfectly happy with how they're deploying on the cloud. But we're targeting small companies who need to do a lot with less, as well as small to medium-sized companies who are looking to scale platforms that are becoming difficult to maintain. So like legacy platforms that already have customers, already generating value, can't go through rewrites or refactors to the new framework of the day, but want to start scaling out with microservices or serverless options. We can provide a lot of the value of serverless options, or we can provide a lot of the ease of development of serverless options with a lot of the security and protections and comfort of having your own solution that you own completely.
Yep. Okay, cool. And I'm assuming these teams, your users are the engineers, right? Or do you ever have sort of the, product person coming in and say, hey, like, who's kind of going to be the one that's going to evaluate, say, hey, I want to pull this through into my organization?
Don't expect that for the first few iterations, because we're going to need to have some public successes that show how people have used this in their company before people start to understand the value. But one of the things we hope to get to very quickly is the layers of development. So like you said, you were like a business application developer. One of the things that one of the ways
just to clarify, business developer, I mean, I'm a salesperson. But all these words I have learned through osmosis,
sorry.
though. So I know lots of pictures. I can draw this out. So you're painting a very nice word picture actually for me. So,
well, you provide value and connect people, and you connect things, right? Mm-hmm. It's like when we think about software development, there are people who have like a computer science backgrounds, very good at algorithms, and then there are developers who want to build something that a user touches and provides value to the world. Those to me are two very, very different types of people. One works very well with constraints and limitations, and they can squeeze the best out of what they have to work with. But as soon as you start to change the scope, change requirements, they break down. It becomes very difficult to scale out good algorithms to business because the business use cases are infinite. And algorithms are very much constrained to contracts. Business application developers on the other side, they just want to get stuff done. They want to produce value as quickly as possible. So we kind of cut the line in between those two developers, where the Vino components are they have strict contracts. They do things like authenticate a user or render JSON into an HTML file. Or hash a password, things like that. Things where the inputs are explicit and the outputs are known. And then the business application developers connect all these things together in order to deliver applications. So we're targeting the lower level algorithm developer people now, because they're the ones who are going to be able to deliver these components, turn them into microservices to deliver value for their teams. But we want to build up enough of the registry and example flows and use cases so that we can show people it's like, hey, now that this foundation has been built, putting comments on your site or a social network feed or authentication ends up being just dragging and dropping, or using this what we call schematic very, very easily. When we get to that point, then it becomes easier to see how product people or non-senior engineers or architects can start to add much more value by leveraging what has already been done.
Yep. What's the sales pitch on the website? I mean, I think it's code less, build more. And I want to try to composable application platform that gives you a shortcut from idea to reality. Vino applications are made of composable building blocks that you can reshare, remix, and reuse anywhere. So to that, kind of back-end developer persona, that probably means enough, or it might mean enough, and you can comment on that. But to me is kind of I understand things in diagrams. I understand it to mean like, this is different from other low code platforms because it's actually giving you, it's more like pre-built components, and it's giving you a lot of like scaffolding, or it's just giving you a big head start. It's not actually taking away, it's not limiting your options.